All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Green Sports Alliance webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie. I'm the manager of events and operations for the Green Sports Alliance. For any of you guys new to the Alliance itself, we are the largest entity that brings together professionals in the sports and sustainability industry. You can feel free to email me if you're interested in learning more about us. Um, I'm going to put my email in the chat. You guys are welcome to use the chat as well. You can introduce yourself if you have questions along the way. We can see the questions. Everyone else can see the questions. Use it however you want. Before I pass it to our panelists, we do have a few upcoming events. I also put where you can find these webinars in the chat as well. It's right underneath my email if you can see it. Uh, on September 3rd, we are joined by associates at Duke University, North Carolina State, and Blue Strike Environmental to discuss new research on collegiate sports fans, new pilot projects, and a new Green Sports Alliance coalition. So if you're interested, you can click that link and register now. On September 29th, we are welcomed by associates from Denver Summit FC, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Charlotte Hornets to do a workshop on how to sell to sports. So if you're a corporate member of ours, or if you're looking to break into this industry, this webinar will be very useful for you. It's an open Q&A, so if you have questions for these folks, they come from all works of life in terms of sports, and I think it'll be super useful to you guys. And lastly, we have Green Sports Day coming up on October 6th. I'm going to pass it to President Obama to introduce it. It doesn't have sound at the beginning, but it will.
And the Penns have been leaders in the Green Sports Alliance, making their facilities more energy and water efficient, lowering their carbon footprint as they travel. I want to thank Commissioner Bettman and the entire NHL for leading the way in environmentally sustainable sports, because we want to continue to have ice so that we can play hockey.
So this year we are partnering with nonprofits across the US to host community impact events. And here is a sneak peek at the regions to where we have booked events already. Take note, if you're in one of these regions, the coming soon will be coming soon. You can be on the lookout also for the toolkit where you can find how to celebrate Green Sports Day. You can take a sustainability pledge, or you can promote on social media the successes that you've had over the year. And now I'll introduce our panelists. We have Andrew Bohenko, the Sustainability Initiatives Manager at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and Michael Kraus, the Interim Executive Director from the Green Sports Alliance.
All right. Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome.
Mr. Bohinko, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
We've got, what do we have? We've got quite a few participants here. So before we go into all things FIFA and Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium related, I do want to take maybe the first couple minutes just to get to know you for a second, almost podcast style. I would love to know, you're in what year at Mercedes-Benz Stadium at this point?
I will be here 7 years in the end of August. So I started as a part-time associate for Mercedes-Benz Stadium as a zero waste analyst in 2019. Um, got hired to create and help create the first zero waste Final Four. That would have been April 4th of 2020. Unfortunately, as of March 13th, 2020, that didn't happen. And everything was shut down after we had two successful zero waste events at the stadium in March of 2020. From there, we went through some process changes, but the infrastructure that existed at the stadium going that we had put in for the Final Four that was canceled all existed. So when we came back to a full stadium schedule in July of 2021, I was brought on as sustainability coordinator for the stadium to get us to zero waste every day, not just for events. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. So then progressed through that. We became a zero waste stadium in March of 2022 and have been ever since. And a couple of the certifications that we acquired along the way, I'm going to talk about today. But Mercedes-Benz Stadium was built with sustainability in mind, opened in 2017, and we achieved a lead construction, building and construction and design from lead at a platinum level for 4.1. And that kind of laid the literal and figurative foundation for sustainability at Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
I love that. And I'll come back to a point here, but you said that you achieved zero waste. That was years later, right, as a stadium. So I think that's important for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
Mercedes-Benz Stadium, one of the leaders in terms of built environment sustainability, first lead platinum in the world, stadium in the world. Um,
Stadium
First to do true zero waste
for a stadium of our
certification for
size.
a
Yeah.
stadium
And
of your
then
size. But
first certification.
it
Yeah.
didn't happen overnight, right? So this wasn't like
Yeah.
2018 you opened and you got there. So again, before we go too deep, why tell us about why you can't just open a stadium, or in this case didn't, and go to 100%. How did you guys, what was, I mean, there was a COVID, there was a global pandemic in there, but
Yeah.
what were some of the hurdles in there before you got to FIFA over this summer?
Yeah, even before the global pandemic that started in 2020, we still were working on becoming a zero waste stadium, opening up 2 million square feet, um, taking on a lot of the materials and kind of waste receptacles from the old Georgia Dome meant that that infrastructure didn't exist because the infrastructure in the Georgia Dome wasn't set up for a zero waste environment. But understanding that that's where we wanted to be, and I think with the leadership of Scott Jenkins being the GM at the time and being around for the stadium build, had an idea of what the stadium needed to look like to be able to put those elements into all of our spaces to create a zero waste environment. So just standing up a 2 million square foot professional sports stadium with one professional sports team is going to be a challenging process because no matter how accomplished the stadium is, it's never going to be finished when it's open. There's always going to be a punch list of stuff that has to get done. And then you want to make sure that everything is set up for success in terms of training, in terms of the infrastructure that exists. And to try and do too much too fast puts us in a situation where regression would have taken place, and that's not what we wanted to see. So really spent the first 2 years of the stadium opening understanding how the business would work, because the business, as it was projected to work with the Falcons and United, evolved into so much more. Creating 150 to 200 private events a year is a big part of the business that we never projected when we were looking at the stadium as a business entity, and also the amount of concerts and college football games that we had was not something that we had originally intended and accounted for when the stadium opened. So to put that all in perspective and understand that we didn't have a full scope of how the stadium would operate, it makes sense that we started to understand the operations in 2017. We started to implement stuff towards our zero waste program in 2018. And then we
Hmm.
started to achieve zero waste events in 2019
Hmm.
and into 2020.
Now, I said I wanted to get to know you, and you immediately pivoted into all things Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Yeah.
So over the last year, I have been asked by so many people who are aspiring to be in our industry. They want to be in sports and sustainability. Where did you come from? How do I get into this? So
Yeah.
again, for those who are here just for FIFA, hang on for just one more second. But Andrew, before you came to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, how did you set yourself up? How did it come to be that you were, starting to work there? What were you doing before, and how did you get in the position to do what you are now?
Yeah, so I have a really interesting path to get to sports and entertainment, and it's pretty non-typical. I know a lot of people that go to college for sports management, get a master's degree in sustainability, and that's how they evolve into this space. And that is it's a great way to do it. For me, I started off in freelance film production, up in New England, and then ended up being part of production offices in these large budget movies that were looking for somebody to take on the carbon accounting and the sustainability aspects for film shoots. So
Hmm.
that's how I got introduced to corporate sustainability. But even before that, I went to a school in rural New Hampshire. So I went to the University of New Hampshire that has a lot of environmentalism built into that college. And before that, I went to high school in New Hampshire where environmentalism along the Great Bay and along the ocean and the mountains is something that's always very relevant and
Hmm.
typical. So in those spaces, it's just something that is built into the education that exists up in that space. So had
Yeah.
a baseline of knowledge when I got into these professional settings, but never really had a professional background in sustainability. And then kind of just throughout a number of years, kind of self-taught myself and kind of was just very inquisitive about what I wanted to learn and very active in tracking people down and learning new things about these spaces and doing different certificate classes to try and keep up my education past college and eventually got down to Atlanta where I was doing freelance film production and then ultimately decided that that wasn't going to be my career path anymore and started looking at what the next thing was because
Hmm.
my wife moved to Atlanta and we just loved it so much that we wanted to stay here and film is a very transient lifestyle.
Sure.
So started to look at what was available for me in this space that is Atlanta and ended up at the stadium and just kind of clicked really well because my background, even though it doesn't seem like it lines up, the work pace, the lifestyle, and the operations of the stadium is very similar to how film production
Hmm.
operate as well. It's just more
Yeah.
consistent.
And I mean, I've known you for 5 years now, I
Yeah.
believe. 2021 was the first time I visited Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And one thing it's been interesting to watch you, and I'll extend this to Don at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, is you guys just are absolute doers. You get it done. Um, I think that's a part of our industry. It's about part of sports and sustainability is we have to integrate within every part of the business, from concessions to tickets to partnerships to obviously operations conversions. You have to kind of be friend to all. You have to be within every
Yeah.
department. And it's been great to work with you on college football playoffs, the last 5 years being a member of Green Sports Alliance. But you guys, I think, do an incredible job. I've seen the waste sorting there. I've seen the tracking. I've seen a lot of what you guys do of just buckling down and getting it done. And I think that'll be kind of a theme probably that people will hear over, if you listen to Mercedes-Benz Stadium and how you get to these levels. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to have the right people in the right seats. But they've had strategies too. It's been the DNA of the stadium, DNA of the event space for a long, long time. I'll transition here to FIFA, right, to the point of
Yeah.
why we're talking. But in 2025, you guys hosted college football playoffs, huge, massive event. You guys hosted the Club World Cup, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but you went back to back, straight into 4 days of Beyonce.
Four
Uh,
nights of Beyonce in 5 days. Yeah. She doesn't do 3 nights in a row. So we did two, a day off, and then two.
Okay. And then Peach Bowl, you did that this year.
Yeah.
And then you obviously did the World Cup. And then, coming up, you've got the Super Bowl, you've got the NCAA Final Four coming up, 2031. You guys are an insanely busy venue. You've got multiple sports teams that play there. So much happening. But tell us about FIFA. How is it different? They take over your stadium. What was your role? Walk us through kind of pre-games. What's that look like?
Yeah, so I think pre-cup is kind of where we can start, and I would say my role was a little bit different than a lot of other people within the stadium because most people had a counterpart that was in Atlanta that was working specifically on FIFA. For us on the sustainability and environmental side, it was just us. Like we didn't have a counterpart that was on the ground for FIFA until the games actually started. And Terry, who came on, was a great partner and helped organize the volunteers and as much as she could with the limited amount of time that she had here, did a great job of just helping us get through the actual tournament and to the finish line.
And let
But
me pause you there. Terry's from FIFA.
Yeah, so she was a
Okay.
contractor from FIFA that came on right at the beginning of June to help with the volunteers, the environmental stuff and sustainability at the stadium, and then the human rights side as well.
Right.
Um, but before that, it was really just myself, our green team at the stadium, myself and Dawn, and then the city and the city of Atlanta and our Office of Sustainability and Resilience that was making the environmental plan for FIFA. So coming up with an environmental plan, our first meeting with them was actually right after the Green Sports Alliance Summit in Seattle. We had a collection of, I think, 11 of the spaces that were going to be at FIFA, 10 or 11 of us, and we met with FIFA right before the World Cup, the last World Cup that was in Qatar. From there, we had various meetings with them, updated our environmental plan for them, and kind of went through the paces of looking at what this would look like for Atlanta and then as a tournament as a whole, understanding that purchasing across all the stadiums was going to be pretty similar, understanding that what was going to be brought into the stadiums was going to be similar, and then how our daily operations would be altered. The majority of that comes down to the amount of people that are just daily in our stadium. You start to inject 300 to 500 more people into our space, that changes how we have to operate every single day. So expanded hours, expanding the team down in the recovery room every single day. And then that just comes with a lot of other bodies are more offices, it's more equipment, it's more water being drank, it's more people utilizing our associate meals. So all of that had to be accounted for before we actually even got people into the building on May 16th. Also understanding that to place a natural field inside of our artificial turf stadium was an entire other aspect that had to be accounted for. So how does that field interact with the environment that we create around with our set temperatures? And do we have to alter those things? How is that going to be impacted by the amount of energy that we use? And is that going to align with what we want to do for the stadium? So a
Yeah.
lot of things had to be accounted for when we were just going into it. Um, and then we spent about 4 years really with FIFA talking about those things. And then even after those 4 years, there was so many things that caught us by surprise or just weren't accounted for or just kind of communication gaps that needed to be smoothed over once people actually started to get into the stadium because
And I want to
even
can
ideating
I
with
zoom out just one
yeah.
layer? So go back to Seattle, this original meeting, the next year. What was FIFA asking of you? Was the I know ISO 2012 and a lead was on the table. What was at that time? Was there a requirement or direction they were pointing?
At that time, there was no kind of requirement or any kind of direction that they were pointing towards. What they really wanted us to think about and understand and take back to our city counterparts was the idea of a legacy project and what could those legacy projects be, and to start thinking about what would exist there. Because at that time, we didn't even know how many games we would have during the
Right.
club or what those games would be. So and I don't think FIFA really had a good understanding of what they wanted their requirements to be or how they would build the sustainability program. So
Yeah.
really just wanted to keep it at a high level and have a touch point to FIFA, I think, at that time. And then from there, we kind of went on to um, develop an environmental plan, and then off of that environmental plan, FIFA came up with certain requirements or a requirement that all stadiums had to hold to, and kind of adhere to during the tournament or before the tournament started.
Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah,
How did
so
they roll that out?
the requirement that we got from FIFA was that they wanted all stadiums to be LEED O&M certified,
Hmm.
um, at least a silver level. So that was something that they implemented, I think, 2 to 3 years ago. Um, and once that came on, we started to look at how we would potentially adhere to that requirement. We're looking at opportunities to showcase Mercedes-Benz Stadium's true certification and our lead for new building. as a way to account for all the things that were in O&M without getting that requirement or getting that certification. Um, but ultimately, we decided that we wanted to try and look at the lead V5 and be part of
Yeah.
as the next evolution of the stadium. As we kind
And
of
V5, for those who may not know, is the newest version, right?
Yeah, that was just released. So we were accepted into the beta program and went through that process with EcoWorks to acquire that certification. And ultimately, we got to a point where some of the prerequisites were not aligned with how we operate the stadium. So ultimately, we had to decide, do we want to continue down this path and potentially not get that certification during the FIFA time, or do we want to look at getting version 4.1, which is the version that we have for our new building, and then look at how high of a level we could get for that. So
Sure.
did make that pivot towards the middle end of March. So that was pretty late in the game. We were basically having people walk into the building as we were changing over from that V5 to
Wow.
4.1. And then ultimately, an hour and 18 minutes before the last game, July 15th, we were certified for our lead O&M at 4.1 at a platinum level. So
Wow.
a really
Congratulations.
great achievement that would not be possible without EcoWorks and that partner. But also something that I feel like was a great learning experience for a lot of our engineering team, for our team as well, to understand
Mm.
where our gaps still lie in terms of how we acquire our energy, how we cool the building, how we allocate certain spaces, and then potentially looking at what we can do to elevate ourselves in 3 years' time to potentially get that version 5.
Let me ask you a question. We talked to different folks who lead organizations globally, right? So think UEFA or World Athletics, and they're putting in standards as an events. They're going into whatever market and they're saying, hey, if you're going to host our event, you have to meet these thresholds. And it seems like FIFA had a similar approach with Lead O&M. They did that with the venues, right? Across all the venues. How much you guys were advanced? You're looking at sustainability from an operational standpoint where you're doing this every day. It's in the DNA of the program. Your biggest decision is, do we do the new one or the old one, right? I mean, but you're going to achieve lead O&M. How much do you think the other 15 venues, many of them were, high-level sustainability champions as well,
Yeah.
were affected? And if you're an event organizer coming to the United States, um, how much do you listen to this conversation and say, oh, I should be putting this into my RFP, or I should be putting this into contracts. The venues are going to do it. How much do you think it affected you guys? Were you able to respond to it? And how do you think your neighbors did too?
Yeah, I think it affected us by getting us to think about how we wanted to look at the next evolution of the stadium. Those two things I think lined up really well together. We're just about to go into our 10th season of the stadium being opened, which is pretty crazy to think that next year
Yeah.
we'll be open for 10 years. But we want to look at Mercedes-Benz Stadium as its kind of second era going into the next 10 years. So I think those two things lined up really well where they're coming in and we're looking at this super massive event that really the stadium was designed for. Like a big part of the stadium design was around these massive international soccer events. It's why we have the retractables in our corners so that we can bring those seats in and out and make an expanded field. And so we had thought about what it would take to host an event like FIFA when the building was being designed. And then as we kind of see them come into the building, that gave us the opportunity to one, revisit that, and two, to think about the operation side of what these super massive events would look like in the stadium, especially after going through two or three of them already, having the Super Bowl once, having college football championship twice gave us a background of what we can do in the stadium to be successful during this event. I don't know if other spaces have had that same kind of experience in their stadium, and then that also helped them, or not having that kind of experience kind of hindered them a little bit.
Hmm.
I would say that's one thing that is probably a critique on our side of FIFA is that we don't necessarily know even now what were the successes, what were the challenges of the other 15
Yeah,
spaces. And I think if FIFA had done a more cohesive job of organizing everybody together, even if that's regionally, even if that's by the amount of games that each space has. So if you have four or more games or six or more games, then you're in this group. If you have less,
sure.
you're in another group. Just ways of siloing off certain people or connecting certain people together so that we could have had a more cohesive idea of what each space was doing and what our other challenges were. Um, it just didn't seem like that was something that was ever able to come to fruition on the FIFA side to get
Yeah.
everybody together consistently enough to be able to voice those challenges and understand what other people were doing and what was successful for them.
Yeah, and I do want to come back to that. Maybe at the end as we
Yeah.
talk about, this legacy you're talking about, but also, next steps, how do we do it better for future events? But Katie, if you don't mind pulling up the match day PowerPoint here, I want to go into game day for you. I think
Sure.
you guys were a great example, are a great example of how to do this the right during the tournament. So I'm curious, how did it differ for you guys from like a normal game? Working with the Falcons or, on any of typical event day? What's it look like for FIFA? And what were some of your outcomes you're proud of?
Yeah, I would say the differences are pretty great. And that I think was one of the biggest surprises. I mean, we knew they would be different, but the scope and especially what happened outside, you can see on the right side of the screen that that's a picture of our Home Depot backyard. The two actually on the right side is a picture of our volunteers that were operating out of the Home Depot backyard at their sustainability tent that was set up with the mascots that were around the stadium, promoting the sustainability aspects of FIFA in the stadium with our volunteers. And Don Brown did an unbelievable job coordinating that and getting us dedicated sustainability volunteers for the stadium. So we actually had 13 people that were inside of the stadium for every single match day, helping us out, doing recycle and win, which you can see on the bottom left. That's something that we definitely wanted to maintain is we wanted to maintain the staples of the stadium that make us unique on game days.
Yeah.
So having our volunteers, making sure that they had access to all the spaces that they needed to go because credentialing was so strict. And then making sure that we still maintain things like our recycle and win program and our bike valet, so that people had access to those and people that come to the stadium regularly would still see those elements and understand that not too much has changed. But for us, it's really about the hours of operation. And that I think was one of the biggest things is that, again, when you inject 300 to 500 extra associates and then however many volunteers into a match day, that changes how egress happens. That changes how much waste is in those egress or ingress lines and how much waste is coming from the associate meals pre-event, how early the stadium is opened. For a typical match, we open the doors 2 hours before the match. For most of these games, we open the doors 3 hours and 15 minutes before the match. So
Wow.
if we have a noon game, a lot of times we are opening doors at 8:45.
That's a
And
lot more food.
that's a ton of food, literally tons. Actually, 407,000 pounds of compost that we produce between food scraps and concessions and people's different things that were coming out of the bowl.
Katie,
But
do you mind going to the next slide? I want people to see this
yeah, and
visualization.
I'll jump into that too once I get through this really quick. But the fact that we had 3 hour doors, 3 hours and 15-minute doors, and then we were basically at capacity 45 minutes before the match. That's something that is not necessarily typical of an Atlanta event. If you've ever been to a concert, sporting event in Atlanta, typically people always show up late. It's just part of the charm of the South. For these events, that was not the case. People were in, they were
Hmm.
active, they had access to our an 11-acre green space, the Home Depot backyard for the Stadium Fan Fest. We were also less than a mile away from our City Fan Fest, which was in Centennial Olympic Park. So people could easily access
Yeah.
Centennial Olympic Park and then walk over to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which I think helped get everybody into the building much faster. But again, when you
And
have those extended gates, you have a lot more waste at the gates and you have people bringing different things up. So
yeah.
that that change, I think, was our biggest thing. Having people in the building for 8.5 hours, which is more aligned with a football game than a soccer game, that really changed how things operated.
Andrew, before you go into this slide, which
Yeah.
I think is worth dwelling on, it's impressive. Personal curiosity. Were the tournament games, the knockout round games different than the pool
Yeah.
matches?
Yeah, I think the intensity of how people entered the building really kind of changed things. So, they were basically all noon or 3 p.m. games for us at the stadium. So they were
Okay.
all typically around the same time. As you get closer to those more high level matches, you have more high level people in the building, which brings increased security, increased scrutiny for things coming in and out of the building. So any last minute change that we needed, if there was inclement weather that we had to account for and get more ponchos in the building or bins in the building for our staff. All of that stuff was much more difficult to enter on the off days leading up to those events
Hmm.
than previous. So I think that is probably the biggest difference is how stuff gets into the building and then the attention to detail in the spaces, especially the premium spaces, was so heightened as we got to those knockout round games. We had to be super aware of every little thing and where our bins were positioned, making sure they're out of sight lines in these VVIP areas, making sure we're sweeping through the suites before the doors are even close to opening so that nothing was out of line, nothing was out of place, especially when you're having a game every 3 days, basically. Um, that made it so that that consistency of auditing our spaces had to be increased throughout the entire
Yeah.
68 days that they were here.
So let's talk the FIFA metrics here.
Yeah.
Almost 1 million pounds of waste produced, not thrown in the landfill, right? But produced for in
Yeah.
68 days. Can you give us an idea of how different that is from a normal 2 months? Like, is this double? Is this about normal? What are we talking about here?
Honestly, it's not that different from our normal June and July, when we have all these people in the building for United games throughout the summer. Summers are
Okay,
also a big part of our concerts. Um, it is a lot that we had in the building, probably about 20% more than typical. We do about 5 million pounds of waste a year. So not too different than a normal 2 months, maybe a little bit less. Um, Especially because these are two of our busiest months of the year, typically, with the private
sure.
events and concerts that we typically have in July. But the consistency of things, that I think was a bit different than what we typically do. So having a game on a Monday and then a Thursday and then a Sunday and then a Tuesday and then a Friday, that made it so that finding those gaps to do a full recovery and cleaning of our space made things really difficult. So
Hmm.
having to run shifts, 2 shifts a day, basically every day for 3 weeks, made things a bit more chaotic than they typically are and burn people out a little bit more than they typically do. So finding those spaces to get people away from the stadium, I think, was the biggest challenge rather than the amount of waste that we had in the building. And a lot of that, the things that I think are pretty different from this is the amount of glass that we had in the building and then the amount of cardboard that we had in the building as well. Um, just like a lot of these concerts, there was so much merch that was sold throughout the building. I don't think
Right.
there was a single game where we didn't sell out of the majority of stuff in the building. Um, and so that just had to be replenished every 3 days, which means that there was an immense amount of cardboard that was constantly coming down to our space that had to be baled, accounted for, and then hauled away, so that we could get a rebate back for that. So I'd say those are the two things that we saw a pretty big increase on.
Yeah, I mean this is massive. I there's some programs you maybe started or grew during this furniture diversion or donations and things like that. that I think are some other major wins during this process. I'd love to hear about some of the things that these mega events brought that you guys met the challenge and what you do with some of these abnormal amounts of, items like furniture.
Yeah, and so with the furniture that we acquired from On Location, I think that is one of our probably most impressive things that we had in the stadium was our ability to get all of that out. So with the stadium being so integrated into a lot of spaces in Atlanta, we were able to find some contacts at Furniture Bank of Metro Atlanta. And with them, we were able to take out all of the furniture that On Location had brought in. So On Location was the third party vendor for FIFA for all of the premium spaces. To create a cohesive look across all the stadiums, they brought in a lot of their own furniture for these premium spaces. Um, and since these people were on contract, they did not necessarily have the same kind of contacts in these communities that we had. So we were able to find outlets that they necessarily didn't have access to. So they were looking at a couple of different donation partners, but no donation partner was going to be able to take the mass of stuff that they had in storage and in the stadium. So working with the Furniture Bank of Metro Atlanta and our on location partners here and FIFA, we were able to come up with a plan where in the 3 days after the semifinal match on July 15th, they would package up all of the furniture on pallets in one of our club spaces. And then after our FIFA volunteer event on Sunday the 19th, we were able to pack all that up and then send it to Furniture Bank of Metro Atlanta with 53-foot trailers that Mercedes-Benz Stadium had acquired. And yeah, and that's on the next slide if we want to look at a couple of pictures of that. And through those, we actually had 73 pallets that were picked up before we even got to the 20th of July that were able to be picked out from that warehouse that you can see those pictures on the top right there. And so Furniture Bank of Metro Atlanta was able to pick those up on their own. And then we were able to shift money that we had allocated for open tops to take out waste from the stadium and allocate that towards renting 53-foot trailers that would transport that to
Wow.
Furniture Bank. So keeping the cost away from Furniture Bank and keeping the cost actually lower than we had allocated for open tops for the stadium, we were able to get we were able to get all of that furniture, which was those 73 pallets from the warehouse and about 60 pallets to 70 pallets from the stadium over to Furniture Bank. And we're still compiling an inventory for exactly what was sent over there because that dissolution of assets was so fast. Our last game was July 15th. FIFA had to be completely out of the building by July 22nd, and we had two private events in the stadium for FIFA on July 16th and July 19th. So we truly weren't done with FIFA events until July 19th, and everything had to be out by the 22nd. So we actually these two slides, this one and the next one, are two slides that really highlight how much stuff we had in the building left over, and then how much we needed to get out. So volunteer clothing was a big part of the stadium as well. We got 52 pallets of FIFA volunteer clothes, shoes, and
Wow.
accessories that were left over after FIFA had left the building on the 22nd. So we set all this up in our media dining space, and you can see a couple of pictures of that. And then every associate in the building and all game day associates had an opportunity on one day to come through and get one of each. So to get a hat, a pair of shoes, a jacket, a shirt, shorts and pants and some socks, they could get one of each. And then basically at the end of that day, we took an inventory of everything that was left. And that's what you can see on the bottom right there at 8:40 a.m. on that morning. We still had all of these things, probably about 1,700 pairs of shoes and hundreds of boxes of shirts and shorts and jackets. And we basically just said, okay, well, we're at the point where everybody's had an opportunity to get something. We're going to open it up to anybody in our stadium that wants to take whatever they want to take. So open that up at 8:40 a.m. By 9:55 a.m., everything was completely gone. So kept it organized, make sure people weren't taking too much more than they needed, but gave everybody a second opportunity to get a pair of shoes for their significant other or their child or somebody else or something that they could give away themselves or another keepsake that would be a commemorative item from FIFA that they can enjoy outside of this.
As That's a masterclass in donation. That is insane, the amount of material you had.
And definitely want to highlight how many people it takes to go into this. And again, it's something that we talk about at the stadium a lot. It's not just my responsibility to be a sustainability professional in the stadium. It's everybody's
Yeah.
responsibility to play their part and to be a part of that. And that could come down to something as simple as volunteering. You can see in a couple of the pictures on the bottom left, people taking time out of their day to help distribute these materials to people to keep it orderly and keep it fast so that people couldn't get in and out quickly. And that's just something that is built in and ingrained in the core values of our stadium and the Blank family of businesses that makes people want to see this and say, okay, well, it seems wasteful to take all these pallets and throw them into an open top or into a landfill. And logistically, getting them out of building for somebody to take on all that donation is unlikely to happen between even two or three partners. So then taking their time to make sure that these things get distributed equitably and making sure that none of this ends up in landfill is something that really impressed by our team and specifically our sustainability coordinator, Sophia, and then one of our new doc people, Joseph, really took on the responsibility of making sure that this stuff was organized, itemized, and that not only did these two elements happen, which were a huge part of our dissolution, but that we were able to give 6 pallets of these volunteer clothings to Georgia State, who did a really amazing job of helping out our volunteers and feeding them, making sure that Life Cycle Building, who is a partner of ours for our donations, was able to get a number of tables and chairs that they can
Hmm.
repurpose for people to upcycle, making sure that the 3,500 pounds of fabrics that we acquired in the stadium between ourselves and the Fan Fest, we're able to get over to Reloom, which is a company that upcycles fabrics and is making them into different totes, crossbody bags, keychains, and different things like that. Um, and then making sure that Atlanta Public Schools, who we always like to highlight and try and get as much as we can to, was allocated a number of different school materials and supplies that they can use for school supplies, folding tables, and different things that they can utilize. So making sure that we're distributing this to a number of different community activations and
Yeah.
people, but also making sure that it's done in a way that is quick and efficient, is something that, yeah, it takes a whole village of people and a community of people to make that happen. Um,
So, Andrew, we've got some questions on reporting, and I'm going to get
sure.
to those in a minute, actually. And I want to open it up to kind of Q&A to anybody. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat right now so we can start to see those and filter through them. I have enough questions for you to last us all day. However, I guess one of the things, and this is kind of a Green Sports Alliance perspective when we're talking to mega events with a particular league or it's a stadium, federation, whatever it is, there are mega events in some ways are an opportunity. And sorry, we didn't prep for this one. I'm throwing this one out of the blue to you, but they're an opportunity in some ways to implement a major change, something that people have been working on, whether that's sustainability tracking or like you were talking about lead O&M. Some of these kind of strategic, how do we shift them? I'm curious from your perspective, if you found that to be true, if when you look at some of these big events, the Peach Bowl, the college football playoffs, FIFA's, are they chances to elevate your sustainability program and push? And I'm thinking about alignment across your leadership, across the people within your organization to say, hey, big events coming. I've been working on this. I think this is the time to do it. Or is the reality, and I really want to know here, actually, we have to de-risk this moment. We cannot try anything during FIFA or these big events. We have to do it 5 months before. How do you go about getting ready for new initiatives and major impacts around these big events?
Yeah, I think the best way we look at it is for something like FIFA or college football championship that we worked with you guys on, the planning stage is so long that at the beginning we want to make sure that we account for everything and that anything that is potentially possible, we're basically going to throw at a wall and try and get as much to stick as we can. Um, and then understand that and by doing this repetitively for Super Bowls and college footballs, and then FIFAs, you kind of get the cadence of how these things go. Um, Understanding that as much as we want to get done, as we get closer and closer to events, a lot of that stuff, when we start to organize it 4 years ago, doesn't seem like it's possible. And then as you revisit it over and over again, it's implemented years before we started.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
but things that are a little bit more difficult, and different kinds of recycling around chip bags and different things like that just became such a time suck that it just felt like okay, this is not something that's going to be productive for us to spend any more time on. Let's shift to look at how our operations can sustain removing these chip bags from our two bin system. So making sure that we had enough staff that was going to be able to sort through every single bag so that so that we're making sure that we're not throwing chip bags into our compost and that those are making it into the landfill, making sure that when we understand that we're going to have these different kinds of items in our concessions, that we work with Levy Food and Beverage to make sure that their processes are up to a space that makes it so that when we come into the World Cup, to they've had plenty of opportunities to test out these processes to make sure that they are capturing all the chip bags and all the landfill items that are in the concessions so that those aren't making their way into the general waste that is that needs to be less sorted because the concourse waste is much cleaner even during a FIFA event where we have all these non-compliant items in the building than what the concessions waste would be. Um, and then understanding that at a certain point you have to say we're not going to win this battle, and I would say that that comes down to things like glass in the suites. So typically, glass is never something that we want our fans to have, because it is a hazardous material when it gets into our waste stream, but within the structure of FIFA, there was no way that we weren't going to have glass Coke bottles or champagne bottles in our premium spaces. So then shifting to making sure that by the time we get to the game one, we have enough receptacles in our bars and around our spaces that will hold just glass, and that our food and beverage team has a very clear understanding of what goes in those glass bins. That's glass, not ceramics, not stones or any other waste, that they're utilizing those in the correct way. That way, we're keeping that hazardous material out of our waste stream.
Hmm.
So it's those kinds of processes and just making sure that we're accounting for all of these things day to day leading up to this, then we are going into it. So from a leadership standpoint, it doesn't feel like much shifted as we went into FIFA. Not a lot of our processes changed. What we did change was our attention to our spaces and then how many people we brought in to sort and to audit these spaces. So between our volunteers and our recovery room staff, and then myself and my team, making sure that everything was accounted for inside the building and the exterior spaces that we had to service as well.
I have one more question for you, but I'm going to do it last. I'm going to get to some
Okay.
of the questions in our chat real quick. And then I know we've got a couple sign off pieces here. One, I think is a pretty good question. I think, how did you calculate the PET so precisely? If you want to go back to that slide, Katie, on reporting. Um,
The number of water bottles,
that's
so
right.
that all comes from purchasing data. So same thing as we know that we had 585,000 transactions in all of our food and beverage spaces. We know that 175,565 bottles of water were sold to people. Now, that number does not account for volunteers and staff. So the amount of PET water bottles that we did recover is going to be greater than that because the amount of PET water bottles that we gave to volunteers and their staff, that is going to go up as well. And we captured the majority of those. Now, some people certainly took those home. So I guess that's not an exact number. That's the number of water bottles that were purchased. And then we were able to collect all the water bottles that were purchased in the stadium and get them back into our recycling stream.
And that is because, if you're not familiar with Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and there are others that do this, rip open every bag and go through everything. So you're describing kind of an every bottle back circularity, only
Yep.
possible through, actually sorting through the waste to make sure they're
And
not getting past you, essentially.
yeah, and our clear bag policy for our waste bags. So that makes things incredibly advantageous when we are looking through those. Having every bag that comes down to our recovery room be a clear bag, a clear waste liner, makes it so that if we do have a bag of all recyclables, our team can quickly open up that bag, look through it really easy because light gets through it really easy, or flip it over a couple of times and make sure that there's no pieces of compost or materials in there that need to go into the landfill, and then just rip that bag open and dump it into our mixed recycling compactor, or vice versa with our compost.
On the energy and the water looks like maybe the comma's in the wrong place, 13 million gallons maybe,
No,
but
I think there's one too many zeros in there. It's
okay, 1.3
one,
million.
yeah.
Do you guys do anything in terms of offsetting, or does FIFA do anything in terms of mitigating the effects of those?
There was no initiative by FIFA to offset any energy at the stadium. We did do a volunteer event at the front end of FIFA with Trees Atlanta, which plug. We are also doing a volunteer event with Trees Atlanta for Green Sports Day, which is going to be super fun. So on the 6th of October, we'll be reconvening with them to plant some more tree canopy. But we did not do anything to offset the energy, as far as I know, from FIFA. I've not necessarily heard a post-event report from FIFA on how they were going to manage the energy or the plane travel or anything like that. We do have 4,000 solar panels on site that were running the entire time that we had FIFA. So I would say a small portion of that was our solar energy that goes back into the grid that then services the building. Typically,
Sure,
we don't have games at noon on a Monday, so that's why we pump that back into the grid. A lot of our events are at night, which is when we have our peak time, but
sure,
during the day, it's mostly just associates in the building, and we don't run all that much power because of our massive windows that we have in the building. We get a lot of natural light. For our water, we offset a small portion of that, well, not so small portion of that, from our 680,000 gallon cistern that we use to pump into our AC cooling towers to offset to the domestic water usage that we had there. So that 680,000 gallon cistern can fill up and empty as we see fit. So a decent portion of that was offset because the main use of that water was from different kinds of sinks in our kitchens, and then obviously our AC cooling tower. So we did offset some there, and we're still calculating on exactly what that is, and we'll have all of those metrics dialed in by the time we get to the end of the month, and we have to give that final
sure.
report to FIFA. Um, yeah, and then
Another quick one for you, 407,500 pounds of compost. That's collected, not just an overall produced number. There's a question about, I mean, we're out of time in some ways. I can't get to all of them. If you have a chance to read some of these and respond, that'd be awesome. My thought is, and we got to wrap up here in just a minute. And I know I'm going to invite Katie back on to tell us a little bit about, you know, if there's any final announcements. But my last question for you, Andrew, is I guess what's next for Mercedes-Benz Stadium? You are looking at a stadium that's high performing. You've got the Super Bowl coming up in 2 years. You're reporting, you're tracking, you're talking about solar panels. You've got the water and the cooling towers. There's different stories. You're at the highest level for zero waste kind of in the industry. And what is next for Mercedes-Benz Stadium? And I would also put that under the Andrew umbrella. What's next for you there?
Yeah, well, we were just also recertified for our true certification at a platinum level. So we were able to get that right as we were going into the last week of FIFA. So that was a huge accomplishment, as that's something that we'll maintain for the next 3 years before we want to recertify again. But the next thing I think really is looking at the Super Bowl. We spent 4 years doing planning for FIFA. We spent a full year planning for the college football championship. Well, we will spend 2 years planning for the Super Bowl. And I think everything that we learned from this is very applicable to the Super Bowl and how we want to structure that as an event that really highlights the city of Atlanta and our sustainability across the entire city, not just Mercedes-Benz Stadium and across our entire campus with the stadium, Georgia World Congress Center, and State Farm, but also how we can push the bounds of what we did for our last zero waste campus, which was college football championship, and taking the lessons that we learned from both of these events and then translating those to the NFL, and then hopefully putting some pressure on the NFL as a league to look at sustainability holistically across the entire league, and then really try and highlight sustainability as an asset for the NFL, and how we can look at what we're doing now and then implement some of these things into more stadium spaces, or even make some of these things requirements for stadiums across the entire NFL.
Awesome. There's like 5 or 6 questions, Andrew,
Yeah.
in the chat. I don't know if while we're wrapping up, if you want to respond to them in the chat. But I think we're going to officially wrap up on our end. Katie, any last announcements?
No, but the questions, some of them are geared towards Andrew, but some of them are very general. So I'm going to put my email in the chat again. The Green Sports Alliance specializes in a lot of the questions slash issues you guys are asking in the chat. So feel free to shoot me an email. I can always transfer you off to somebody who is a professional in it, or my team itself has a lot of good answers for you. Um, so I will leave it with that. Andrew, thank you so much. It was so good to see you. We're excited to see what happens in your future mega events. Maybe we'll do a follow-up in a couple of years and compare the two.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Michael, as
Awesome.
well.
Good to see you, Andrew. Thank you,
Yeah,
Katie.
good to see you both.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.